Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's Julie here from the Story a Day podcast. And this week, I want to ask you a question about getting feedback on your work. And I want to share something that always surprises people when they are in a group with me and we're talking about feedback. And later on, I'm going to give you a writing prompt which is based on one of the 5 senses. Which one will it be? Ooh, the mystery. You'll have to stay tuned and find out. Okay, so this week I'm thinking about feedback because one of the questions I get asked a lot by writers who are either new to writing or are in the midst of a project, basically at any stage, people will ask where they can get some feedback on their writing. And sometimes that is helpful, but I'm going to make the case that sometimes it's not actually feedback that you need. Okay, hear me out. It's really, really natural when you have come back to your writing for the first time since somebody made you write a creative writing story thing in high school or middle school or elementary school or primary school or whatever you call it. And you were in a class and somebody made you write a story and you may have enjoyed it. And then life happened and got away from you a little bit. And so you haven't written for a while, you write something and then you have no idea whether it's any good. And you have more than that, you have no idea whether you have any business thinking that you could be writing stories. It's a really, really common reaction to say, is this even a story? Should I even be trying this? The good news is that asking that question almost guarantees that you're neither a sociopath nor a psychopath. It means you're not failing the Dunning-Kruger test. Look it up. It's natural and it's healthy for you to wonder. Also, if you're just coming back to your writing, asking for feedback on the specific piece is natural, but it's also not that helpful. Because if you've written your first story in 15 years, 5 years, whatever, I'm probably going to look at it and go, yeah, this looks a little bit like a story that was your first story in 5 years or 15 years. You're using passive voice. You took too long to get to the point. Your characters don't exactly sound like real people when they talk. Loads of stuff that is just normal for everyone to do when they aren't regularly practicing and honing their craft. So the feedback you're going to get is likely to be sort of useless if you're newly back to writing for the first time, because it's going to be kind of generic, and it might be helpful for you to go, okay, look at these things, look at your dialogue, look at your use of the passive voice, look at your descriptions, whatever. Might be useful. But it might not, and it might discourage you. And my suggestion is to think about whether or not what you really need is feedback on the specific piece. Because it's been my experience working with writers since 1998. I've worked with a lot of authors. I've been around a lot of writers. I've been in... My first online writers group was in 1996, and I actually, got a job working with writers 2 years later. In my experience, the thing that does the most for anyone's ability as a writer is not getting specific feedback on specific pieces, though there is a place for that, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The thing that really helps is just hanging around with other authors, other writers. So if the only way you can do that is to get into a critique group or a writer's group where they do feedback, then fine. But understand that it's not really feedback on your writing that you need on every day of the week, or on every month of the year. You need to be hanging around with other writers who will talk about what they're struggling with, who will share resources, who will tell you about the craft book they just read, a technique they're trying out. Just being around other writers and hearing them have insecurities at every stage of every project and every stage of their writing career. You know, you come into the group and there's someone who's publishing stories and they seem like accomplished and they're churning out stories and they're getting them accepted. And then you hear them have the same kind of, oh, I don't know if this story is anything. Does this read like a 4-year-old wrote it? And because everybody goes through that. So I would make the case that what you need might not be feedback on your writing. It might just be to get some writing friends. However, getting feedback on your writing at any stage can be useful if it's done right. It can be kind of damaging. There's lots of ways it can go wrong, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But some of the good things about getting feedback on your writing is what I talked about before. Someone can say to you, oh, you know, your characters sound a little stilted when they're talking. And so you're like, okay, well, I can go and work on that. The problem is when you give a story to a group of people and ask them to find things to say about it, they're going to find things to say about it. You could give them the most celebrated short story ever written and people would find things to critique about it. So you're going to get feedback and it's going to be kind of scattershot. Somebody's going to comment on your use of metaphor. Somebody's going to comment on your dialogue. Somebody's going to comment on the pacing. Someone's going to comment on your character arc. And when you go away from that group and you take that story away, it can be hard to know where to focus, right? Do you work on your dialogue? Do you abandon this story and work on the next story that's just focusing on dialogue? Is this story redeemable? So it can be a little difficult to know what to do with the advice that you get back from a writing group. If a group is not well run, you can run into problems where there's one blowhard in the group who kind of has the same advice for every story, or who is threatened by you because you're writing in the same genre as them. And so they're going to be super critical of you because of their own insecurities. You're also going to find that if the group is not well run, that it will run over time, that you'll just end up talking about one person's story instead of everybody's stories, things like that. So there's a few pitfalls when you're looking for a critique group. And I've got a guide about this. So if you come over, there's a link in the show notes where you can come over to the site and download my critique group primer, which will give you some guidelines on what makes up a good critique group, what to look for when you're looking for a writer's group that gives you feedback. So how to get the best out of, once you've found your group, once you've decided you're going to do this, there are some ways to get the best out of getting feedback on your writing. It can be really appropriate to ask for feedback on your writing at various points. One is, early on, you just want to get a read on the piece itself and say, is this kind of making sense? Is this intriguing? Is dinosaurs on a spaceship even a thing I can do? And for the record, yes, it is. If you're in the middle of a project and you've kind of got disenchanted with it, it can be quite good to get somebody else's eyes on it to say, no, keep going. This is intriguing. And if you're getting close to publication stage, then it can definitely be helpful to have somebody who looks at your story, even just gives it a final check for copy edits, but also anything glaring that you might have missed, any plot holes or anything that's not really satisfactorily resolved. If you've used the same word 4 times in 5 sentences and it's not then, they can alert you to stuff like that. So there are some stages of a piece where it can be really helpful to get feedback on it if you're asking for the right kind of feedback at the right time. There can be stages of your own writing development where it's more and less helpful to get feedback. I've made a case for it being less helpful to ask for feedback at the beginning of your writing journey, which is kind of counterintuitive. I understand that. That's when you feel like you want feedback the most. But I've argued that maybe what you need is just to be hanging out with other writers more. But the thing that I promised to tell you, which is most surprising to most writers when they get into some kind of critique situation, is not so much the feedback they get from other people. Because as I say, it's kind of scattershot. It's all over the place. It's full of other people's hang-ups and the things that they struggle with in their own writing. And that brings me to the surprising thing, which is that when you're in a group, if you're critiquing other people's work as well and giving feedback on other people's work, you're going to do it through the lens of your own writing and your own writing journey and the things that you're struggling with. And I have been told over and over again, and I've certainly found this to be true myself, that the most valuable part of being in a critique group is the bit where you get to read other people's writing. Because you are reading it, and you're noticing the things that aren't quite working, and you're trying to find, no matter how well the group's set up, and you might be told not to offer solutions, but in your brain, you're still going, so why is this dragging? Why am I skipping over this section? Why doesn't that dialogue sound lifelike? And then you start to try and find a solution. And in that, you improve your own writing. So one of the most surprising things about asking for feedback is actually reading somebody else's work and figuring out a whole bunch of stuff about your own writing through that process. So there we are. I'm not saying that you shouldn't ask for feedback on your writing. I am encouraging you to think about what it is you really need. Do you need feedback? Do you need someone to tell you that this piece is okay? Or do you need validation that you're a writer? If it's the latter, which it probably is because most of us need that, find yourself a group. If they have critique, great. Go into it understanding what you're getting into, understanding that you're going to learn from reading other people's work almost as much, if not more, than you are going to learn from other people's opinions. Remember that everybody has an opinion. You don't have to listen to it. And practice is going to be the thing that really gives you confidence in your writing. It's not going to be other people's stamp of approval. You're going to, the more you write, the more you're going to get a feel for how you write stories. Which is why I encourage you to take part in Story a Day May, which is coming up, of course, in a couple of months. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I think you've got the point, and I'm going to take a little break here and then come back with a writing prompt. If you want to learn to write, don't read another book or article. Start writing. I'm here to invite you to consider the Story a Day 3-day challenge. It's a challenge and a workshop that gets people writing and completing stories in just 3 days. And it works. I'm fanatical about getting more and more diverse stories into the world, and I think yours should be among them. If you're feeling the pull to write or level up your storytelling, let me hold your hand through 3 days of short story writing. Check out the 3-day challenge at storyaday.org/3DC. This month's theme at Story a Day is engage, and I want you to engage with other writers. That's why I'm talking about feedback and how to do that, how to engage with writers well. But I also want you to engage readers in your writing. And one of the most effective and possibly most overlooked ways to do that is to get more sensory detail into your stories using all 5 senses. Now, I say overlooked, I don't mean that people don't tell you to do this, because it's a very common piece of writing advice, but we do tend to forget it while we're writing. Unless you've got in the habit, or unless this comes really naturally to you, we tend to get in the habit of using 1 sense, 2 senses maybe, possibly sight and sound, because those are the ones that when we mostly consume stories through television and movies, as we do now, we see things and we hear things, and movies can't really give us smell or taste or the other one. This is like the 7 Dwarfs, I always forget one. But so this month at Story a Day, all of the writing prompts are going to be encouraging you to focus on one of the senses. This week it is smell. So my prompt, I actually give you a writing prompt as well, but I want to encourage you. So the writing prompt is: have a non-assertive character who's stuck in a situation with other people who know less than they do, but keep proposing problems to a solution. And your non-assertive character knows they are wrong and has to decide how they're going to deal with that. That's your writing prompt. But the secondary part of the prompt is to make as many of your descriptions and metaphors smell-based as possible. It's so evocative, smell. It's closely related to our sense of memory. We can have it do wonderful things in stories because it makes associations for the character, and it can put them on edge because it reminds them of particular characters or situations that they've been in the past. You can overdo this in this story just as a sort of exercise where you're like, how many smell metaphors can I cram in here? How many smells can I put in this room? Go overboard just as an exercise. You can always pare it back if you actually end up liking the story and wanting to do something with it. But that's my exercise for you this week, is to write a story about a non-assertive character in a situation where they kind of need to be assertive. And, whether or not they are is up to you. But there's more notes on this prompt over at the blog. The link is in the show notes. And I'd love for you to leave a comment and let me know if you wrote and how it went. And I will see you back again here next week. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week. And of course, keep writing.